But sometimes, like David does in the Psalms, we need to give ourselves a little pep talk and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to abide with the Lord. I'm going to worship him. I'm going to be encouraged in the word today. I'm going to pray. I'm going to spend time with the Lord. Decide today to do what is right and good and helpful to get above your overwhelmed heart and to get your heart back onto the Lord. So this Sunday, we're going to be in Psalm 61, a psalm that I personally just really love, and I think has some real importance and significance for us even here today. Now, one thing that I love about the Psalms is that they oftentimes just portray this real human emotion from its writers. Here the writers are penning, and mostly written from David, but not just David, other writers too. And they're writing and expressing just the very things that they're going through, wrestling with in life, the problems, the challenges, the hardships that they're embracing, and they're dealing with these things, and they're taking it to the Lord, oftentimes in a very raw and emotional way. Sometimes they're sitting there going, Lord, I need you just to smash the teeth of these enemies. Not something that we want to be applying today and adopting, but what we see is just this real human emotion coming out of these Psalms. And since many of us are humans here today, there's a lot of things that we can learn and embrace from the Psalms and apply to our lives here today, because many of us are going to be wrestling through these very things ourselves. Listen, every thought or feeling that we may encounter is covered in the Psalms. If you're fearful, there's a psalm for that, Psalm 23 or 26 or 56 or 91. If you're discouraged, there's a psalm for that, Psalm 42. If you're anxious, guess what? There's a psalm for that, Psalm 37 or 73. If you're struggling with the guilt of sin, you're just in trouble. There's a psalm for that too. Psalm 32 or 51. We're going to hear from one of our pastors in, I think, Psalm 51 this summer. I think. Don't quote me on that. If you're happy, there's a psalm to help you express that, Psalm 66 or 92. And that's just covering a few of the things. And there's many psalms that deal with many of these things. Such as a small sample that reveals to us the extent of the human emotion that's being brought out in the psalms that are being written. It's like we get to kind of peek into the writer's journal or diary and just kind of see what they're dealing with that day and the things that they're bringing to the Lord that, again, they're struggling or wrestling through. Now, what's interesting is, as much as this is dealing with, human emotion and just what people are facing in life, the book of Psalms is really a book of praise. In fact, the Hebrew name for the book of Psalms is Tehillim, which means praises. And so the Psalms were used as public worship hymns. Essentially, this is like the Hebrew hymnal. That's why we see many intros like we have in Psalm 61, where it's being written to the chief musician. So it becomes, again, something that really centers us in on the worship and the praise of God. That's the great thing about these Psalms. Sometimes the author begins in that state of real raw human emotion and expressing the struggles and the doubt that they may be facing. But as they turn to the Lord, guess what? Those doubts begin to fade away, and those problems begin to turn to praise. That's what the Lord would have for us. Wouldn't you agree, guys? To come to him and see that he's got it all covered, that we never are lacking anything, that as bad as things may seem, man, his goodness continues to prevail. So instead of panicking, we can praise him. Instead of worry, we're called to worship him. That's what the Psalms help us to see. So Psalm 61, our summary statement that we're going to be seeing, and we're going to cover primarily just the first 4 verses of Psalm 61. Our summary statement is this: in times of trouble or distress, we need to go to the one who is above our problems and greater than our circumstances. We must look to God, who has been faithful and who continues to be a faithful rock in times of need. And so our breakdown of these verses here, we're going to look at 4 things here. First of all, we're going to see David's distress. David is writing the psalm. David's distress. That's going to be in verses 1 to the first part of verse 2. Then we're going to see David's direction. And if you're taking notes, and please tell me you are, I hope you guys are taking notes and continue to think about these things through the week. Second part of verse 2, David's direction. Then we see in verse 3, David's deliverance. Deliverance, verse 3. Lastly, we're going to see David's decision in verse 4. So write those down, take a picture, and that's what we're going to be looking at. Look at verse 1 with me. Psalm 61, verse 1, as we begin to look at this distress of David. It says here, hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I'll cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. We're going to stop right there. We'll pick up the second part of verse 2 later. But in writing this psalm, we see that David is clearly in some kind of distress, right? We're not totally sure of the kinds of circumstances that he's dealing with. That is the context of this psalm that he's writing. But we know that David had many moments where his heart may have been overwhelmed. What's interesting here is that David is not saying, hey God, if my heart is overwhelmed. He's saying, when my heart is overwhelmed. This is something that David has faced periodically and at different times in his life. It could have been that he's writing this when he's facing Goliath. That no doubt was a giant of a problem and challenge that he had to deal with that could have brought some distress to him. Perhaps this is his heart was overwhelmed when he was going to marry Michal, King Saul's daughter. And King Saul said, well, you can have her, but you got to bring to me 100 Philistine foreskins. That would put my heart in some overwhelming situations having to do that, right? We know David spent a lot of time just hiding out from King Saul. King Saul angry, jealous of David, wanting to kill David, throwing his spear at him a couple times, by which David is having to dodge this thing and hide out in the rocky cliffs. David has experienced an overwhelming heart on more than one occasion. But most likely, and many scholars agree, that David is probably writing this at the time when his own son, Absalom, led a rebellion against David when he was the king. And not only did that drive David out of Jerusalem, out of his home, having his own son betray him, but he also had his close friend Ahithophel betray him and side with Absalom rather than with David. David's heart, no doubt, overwhelmed. David in distress. That's most likely the context of David writing this psalm. So in the midst of this difficulty and trial that David is in, what does he do? He prays. Hear my cry. I mean, David is crying out. He's in anguish. Attend to my prayer. So David here begins the psalm in prayer, bringing it all to the Lord. He asks God, hear my cry. But understand something. This is not just kind of the wishful, hopeful, Lord, I hope you're going to hear me here. He's not saying this in an uncertainty if God will hear. No, David has already seen God faithful in his life. He's calling out to God because he knows God does hear. Aren't you glad that when we come to the Lord, when we open up our heart before him and pour out our heart to him, that God hears? We can turn to God and trust, knowing that it never falls on deaf ears. Hey, you ladies that are married here today, you know that that's not always the reality in the home. Those of you that with kids or bigger kids that you call husbands, you know that oftentimes the things that you say are not always landing and that it is not always heard. Sometimes you're wondering, does anybody hear anything I say? I can tell you, no. It's not that I'm tuning you out. It's not that I'm not wanting to hear. It's just that it takes a whole lot of focus to interpret exactly what you're saying. It's like you're speaking a different language. I'm hearing, but I'm not getting it, right? That's the problem. But you see, nothing gets missed with the Lord. Aren't you glad for that? Nothing gets missed with the Lord. It never falls on deaf ears. In fact, the Lord invites us in to talk with him. And he's never saying, you again? Are you back again? Are you dealing with this again? He's never saying that. He's inviting us in. He's never half listening. He's never tuning you out. He is there present with you, especially when it is a cry that seeks to align ourselves to him. Look at what we read in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 29. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. 1 John 5:14. Now this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he what? Hears us. He hears us, my friends. And along with this, David asks God to attend to his prayer. Attend to his prayer. Now, this is the idea of not just hearing, but now coming alongside, being attentive. Being attentive, and that's the difference between hearing and really listening. I'll tell you, I can hear a lot of things, but comprehend very little. But when I'm attentive, I'm listening, I'm understanding, I'm comprehending, and God knows everything that we are asking before we even ask it. He attends to our prayer. The moment that we call it to God, we don't have to try to get the right line. We don't have to try to look around for the best reception. We call it to God, and he draws near, and he hears, and he attends to our prayer. I'm so thankful for that. You know, one of the reasons that we sometimes go through trials is because God just wants to get our attention to turn to him. Because God desires us to call to him. Why? Because he just desires to be in fellowship with us. He just desires to commune with us. And sometimes we get so busy and distracted with other things that suddenly when those trials come, when our heart's overwhelmed, it's then that we go, oh my goodness, I need the Lord. No, you don't need the Lord just when your heart is overwhelmed. You need the Lord daily, in all circumstances, in all things. We need to be pressing into him always and being and living in fellowship with him. And sometimes those trials are just, again, that wake-up call to say, we need to get back on track with the Lord. He just desires to be in fellowship with you. He just wants us to pour out our heart to him. He wants us to remain in that place of dependency on him. So David is doing just that. And then he says in verse 2, from the end of the earth, I'll cry to you. Again, David is most likely on the run from Absalom, who's leading a rebellion and treason against King David. And David is fleeing out of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, remember, is the center of worship of God. That's the place that everybody wants to be. It's where the tabernacle was. And you see, it didn't matter how far David was from this. To be anywhere outside of that closeness and proximity to God was as though he was on the end of the earth. Didn't matter how far he had to go. To be removed from that very presence of God felt to David like he was on the farthest outskirts of the world. Have you ever felt at times as though God is distant? Like perhaps you felt like it's an impossibility to draw close to him. That you're trying with him, and you just feel like I'm just getting nothing. He just seems so distant and far, as though God's not just on the other side of the world, but on the other side of the galaxy sometimes. And listen, it's true that we might go through seasons where that seems like the reality, but the true reality is that God is never distant from us. The question is not, why does God feel distant? The question oftentimes is, how come I'm distant from God? It's not God that's moved away. It's oftentimes us that's moved away. And he's always calling us to come back to him, to enjoy that fellowship and relationship with him. Here's the great thing is that wherever we find ourselves, whatever season of life, whatever trial we might be in, whatever we might be going through, God is never distant. He is near. And he desires us to press into him. Now I love what we read in Psalm 145, verse 18. The Lord is near to all who call upon him, to all who call upon him in truth. The Lord is near. I love what Tate said in his commentary. He said this: breaking down a perceived distance and the creation of a sense of nearness and presence is a major function of prayer. That's why we're called to cry out to the Lord, to come to him, to turn to him, to pray, to be with him, because it begins to break down a perceived distance, and that's exactly what it is. It's in our head, but it's not the reality, because God is near to all who call upon him in truth. To all who seek after the Lord, draw near to God. What does James say? He'll draw near to you. That's the purpose of prayer. Again, don't use prayer as just your shopping list to get what you want. Prayer is to commune with God and to get us in alignment with him. And in that place of prayer, David is indeed able to unload the things that are heavy upon him. We read there in verse 2 that his heart is overwhelmed. You know, an overwhelmed heart may be one of the biggest threats to our health and vitality today. And what a common thing it is for people to face today. Just go to the grocery store, look at the price of milk, the price of eggs, and it makes you want to come home and have chickens and a dairy cow at home, just like half the people in our church already have. It's great. But you can quickly be overwhelmed by many things, whether it be the loss of a loved one, as we're experiencing this weekend. The loss of a loved one can be overwhelming. Broken relationships, troubles at work can overwhelm people. Financial struggles can overwhelm. The overwhelmed heart is not just for the weak or the worried. It is a common outcome of life. I think if we're all honest, there'll all be times that we have felt that sense of our hearts being overwhelmed. It reminds me of the story of a captain. His name was Captain Bravo. He was a real manly man's man. Took his crew sailing back in the day upon the seven seas. As they're sailing along, the person looking out was spotting a pirate ship approaching them. That pirate ship was getting closer, and they recognized these guys are looking to take over the ship. And so the crew came to the captain and said, "Captain, what are we going to do?" And the captain said to the first mate, "I need you to get my red shirt." So the first mate would kind of bewildered, was like, "Red shirt, what's," okay. Went and got the red shirt. Captain put it on and then just began to fight valiantly and ward off the pirate ship to where they retreated and went away. That night, the crew's all sitting around reminiscing about that great scene and that great fight and holding, their ship at bay. And then the first mate said, "Captain, that was amazing, but why did you want a red shirt?" By which the captain said, "Listen, if I am wounded in the attack, that shirt will not show my blood. Thus you men will continue to fight unafraid." The first mate was like, "Wow, that is amazing." Well, the next day, they wake up, and now the spotter looked out, and he noticed not one pirate ship, not two, but now 10 pirate ships approaching them, getting closer and closer. And the crew suddenly was going, "Oh, this is beyond us. This is worrisome." And the crew came to the captain again. And the first mate was quick to say, "Captain, do you want me to get you your red shirt?" And the captain said, "No, I think this time I'm going to need my brown pants." And you see, there are times where we just can be overwhelmed by the circumstances in front of us to where we feel like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get beyond this? No, there's no need for that. There's no need for that. There, yeah. Times where we can feel so overwhelmed that we don't have any course of action, we think. No solution in mind. What are we going to do? That's when we need a different perspective. And that's where David takes us next. At the second part of verse 2, notice that. What does David say? Listen, when my heart is overwhelmed, and that's something that he has faced before, he's facing now, he says, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." Lead me to that rock that is higher than I. This is a rock that David couldn't get to on his own. It was beyond him. It was higher than him. He needed help. Isn't it funny? Actually, it's quite sad that in our troubles or our struggles, we try working through them in our strength and wisdom. We try to resolve things through our own abilities, and it's usually our own abilities that got us in that predicament to begin with. And so David wisely is saying here, "Lord, get me to that place above me, beyond me. That's not about me. Lord, help me to get my eyes off of me and what's going on in front of me to something higher than me, outside of me." I notice David doesn't pray, "Lord, place me on that rock." He says, "Lead me." That's something that David is being asked now to follow the Lord, to follow him. See, God doesn't just say, deal with it, man. This is your mess. It's your problem. You go ahead and just deal with it. No, the Lord calls us to follow him. And we need to be led to that rock that is bigger and greater than our problems and struggles. We remain overwhelmed oftentimes because we take our own detours. We go our own way. We've gotten away from following his way. And we land ourselves into greater problems and predicaments. And all along, the Lord has a place for us, a place of peace and comfort and safety. But we must follow him to that place that is higher than us. That's why it's so important to start, as David did, to go to the Lord in prayer. God, if there's anything that I've gotten off track of, if there's anything that I've done that's caused, Lord, I need to seek you. I need to follow you. So he says, Lord, lead me now to that place, to that rock that is higher than I. You know, if you've ever been on a hike, we were seeking to go up to a high viewpoint, you know that it can sometimes be grueling along the way. Sometimes you're going through trails in the forest and you can't see anything but that next tree in front of you, and you got the branches whacking you in the face by the person that's walking just a couple steps ahead of you. You know, they're not holding it for you, they're just letting it go like some, boomerang right in the face, right? You're getting bugs biting you, you're dealing with all these things, uneven ground, and there's times you're just going, man, I just want to turn around and head back to the car in the parking lot. But you keep going, and suddenly you reach the summit. And you begin to have a whole different perspective on all that's just gone on before you got there. Suddenly you got these beautiful panoramic views, and you begin to see like, oh my goodness, look at where we've come from. Look at the parking lot way down there. You can barely see my car. Look at this beautiful creation now just all around us. And you get this whole entire different perspective. That's what it is to be led to that rock that is higher than I. Now we know that rock here ultimately, scripturally, speaks of Christ. And when we come to him in our desperate times and we cry out to him and ask him to lead us to that rock that's higher than I, he elevates us above our difficulties. And guess what? The higher you go, the smaller your problems become. Isn't that true? The higher you go, everything else just gets so small. And seen in a whole fresh and different perspective. You get a much broader view of what's going on. That's where Jesus would have us. See, we so easily get freaked out, paralyzed, because oftentimes all that we're seeing is the very things that are right in front of us. And I know what it's like when you're dealing with heavy things, struggles, problems, challenges that you're thinking, how am I going to get over this? And all we see is what's in front of us. But the Lord is saying, just lift your eyes a little higher. Just get your eyes on me. Follow me, because I'm going to lead you to a rock that's higher than you, that's above your problems and predicaments and difficulties. And you're going to see them in a whole different light. And they're going to begin to fade in the worry and concern that you have for them. What a benefit it is to get to that rock that's higher than us. And we have one that is simply saying, follow me. Follow me to that rock. Ultimately, follow me to me. Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest, Jesus says. That's what he has for us. But we have to get our eyes off of our stuff right in front of us that begins to weigh us down, that begins to overwhelm our hearts. And to get our focus off of that and onto the Lord. It's a good prayer to pray, Lord, lead me to the rock that's higher than I. Help me to get a fresh perspective on these things and to know that you're with me and you're going to lead me through this. Now notice here David's deliverance in verse 3. I love this. David says, for you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. Notice David isn't just hoping for God to deliver him. His prayer is not, Lord, if you'll be gracious, Lord, if there's any way, could you just spare me from this and help me through this? David's not just hoping for God to deliver him from his present trial. He's remembering how God has already delivered him from previous trials. Notice what David says. You have been. You've already done this, Lord. I know you're faithful. I know you're good. I've experienced it before. You've met me at my lowest. You've met me in my need, and you've brought me through time and time again. Lord, you have been a shelter for me. David is remembering all that God has already done. He's faced many adversities, many moments where he's overwhelmed, but God has been good through it all and has delivered him out of everyone. Facing bears, lions, enemies all around. And yet here's David, still with breath, still alive, to come before the Lord. David knows that God has been good. In David's present problem, he puts his focus on God's past protection. Oh, how needed that is for us. In your present problems, remember God's past protection and provision. It's true, isn't it, how we can have such a bad memory for the things that we need to remember and such a good memory for the things we need to forget? Don't you find that to be true? I certainly do. I can easily bring to mind the things that have been done that are wrong or hurtful, the things that I should forget, but the things that are good, it's easy, or it's hard sometimes to remember. It would do us well to build up our memory file on the many ways that God has shown himself faithful in our lives. It certainly helps the heart to not be overwhelmed when we are remembering God's constant goodness in our lives. That's what we read last week in Psalm 103. Forget not all his benefits. How we need to remember God's goodness. How he's already shown himself faithful and good. And all we need to do is look to the cross and see how God did the greatest thing for us in sending his son to die on a cross to save us, forgive us our sin, and to bring us in a right relationship with God. When we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And as Romans says, if God has done the greatest thing for us, how much more will he not do the lesser? The more simpler things, like just bringing us through a simple problem that gets magnified in our eyes, but to the Lord, who's above it all, going, oh my goodness, that is nothing, guys, stop worrying. It's nothing for me. And to David, God's not just been a shelter, he's been a strong tower from the enemy. A strong tower is built at various points of the city wall, and especially the corners to kind of fortify the city. It was protective, right? So that strong tower stood as a place of refuge, but a place to look out and defend the city against any incoming enemies. And to David, it's exactly what God has been. He's been that strong tower, been that one that is able to protect and provide. And for David, this is exactly who God is to him, where he can run and find that safety and refuge. Just like Proverbs says, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and they are safe. Anybody saying that song back in the day? Okay, I'm doing the actions for that song. I'm not just up here. You're all going, what a nut. But it's from, all right. Anyways, okay. Strong tower, and they are safe. And David found that safety in God, who is that strong tower. And so when David recalls that God has fulfilled that role in his life, guess what? He can take comfort. Makes it that much easier for David to take this next step. Look at verse 4. So you see David's decision. What does David decide to do? He says, I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings, Selah. So as David reflects on God's faithfulness, he decides now and chooses to abide and stay close to the Lord. He wants to be in the very place that marked the presence of God, and that was the tabernacle. I will abide in your tabernacle. Some of your translations may say tent there. It's most definitely referencing the tabernacle that sat in Jerusalem. Again, that was that place of worship where God's presence came and centered in on. David would say in Psalm 84, verse 10, For a day in your courts is better than 1,000. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. To David, he says, I want to abide in your tabernacle. I want to abide in the place that marks the presence of God. I want to be with you, God. David says, man, a day there is better than 1,000 spent anywhere else. That was how significant and important that was for David. Sometimes we need to make that decision and determine to do what we know is right. That's what David is doing here. It may be the thing we feel like doing the least at the moment, but sometimes, like David does in the Psalms, we need to give ourselves a little pep talk and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to abide with the Lord. I'm going to worship him. I'm going to be encouraged in the word today. I'm going to pray. I'm going to spend time with the Lord. Decide today to do what is right and good and helpful to get above your overwhelmed heart and to get your heart back onto the Lord. That's what David is doing. I will abide. This isn't something where he says, well, Lord, I'm going to give it a good college try. I'll see if I can schedule this in somewhere. No, David is deciding, I'm going to do this. I will abide in your tabernacle. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. Now, we know that God doesn't have wings. Oftentimes in Scripture, you see this anthropomorphic illustration being given to kind of, explain God through human terms. God doesn't have wings, even though Jesus alluded to, again, this idea of wanting to shelter his people with his wings. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, he cried, how often I want to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you're not willing. This is simply revealing the heart of God, how God desires to just come and envelope us in his care and protection. This is what David recognizes of God. But again, it's most likely he has another thought in mind here, a different view in mind. Perhaps these wings are speaking of, again, as he's talking about abiding in his tabernacle, trusting in the shelter of your wings. See, in the tabernacle and in the Holy of Holies, the place where the Ark of the Covenant sat, and the lid of the Ark of the Covenant called the mercy seat. And on that mercy seat, 2 cherubim in gold with wings outstretched towards one another. It's as though David is saying, I want to take refuge here. I want to trust in the shelter of your wings, the very place where those wings met together above the mercy seat. David is saying, I want to trust in your goodness and in your mercy, God. I don't want to rely on anything else but to come to you and enjoy that presence. It was the mercy seat that God said, it is here that I will meet with you. And David is saying, Lord, I just want to be with you. I just want to meet with you. And the progression that we see is so interesting in this psalm, because where does David start? From the end of the earth. David feels like he's on the far outside of the earth, as far as he could possibly be. So much he felt away from God. But then he begins to draw closer to Jerusalem, a strong tower. They're reminded of being in Jerusalem. And then not just coming into Jerusalem, but coming into the tabernacle. But now not just coming into the tabernacle, but coming into the very Holy of Holies in the shelter of your wings, where those cherubim sat above the mercy seat, where God says, I'll meet with you. Here's the progression that David is experiencing here. As he starts with prayer, and he moves to that place of just taking comfort in being with the Lord. And that's the heart of our Father, who desires to surround us, who desires to comfort us. When your heart is overwhelmed, get your eyes off of your problems, off of your predicament and difficulty. Get your eyes onto the Lord, who desires to wrap his wings around you and comfort you and protect you, and to where you can just be blessed in his presence. I love what Modier says. He says, never fear to be intimate with God. God desires to be intimate with you, and is only hurt when you remain at a distance or draw back from his embrace. David doesn't remain the ends of the earth. He moves himself closer to God. Please recognize how the Lord longs to draw you in how he desires for you to spend time with him and to be intimate with him. What a blessing we have in that. Well, let's just finish this psalm here, and I just want to touch on one part. Verses 1 to 4 was what I really wanted to concentrate on, but finishing the psalm, verse 5 says, "For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. You will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. He shall abide before God forever. Oh, prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows." Notice how the psalm ends here now. It ends with praise. Praise to your name forever. It starts with prayer, ends with praise. Like many psalms, Psalm 61 opens with prayer and ends with praise. This is a biblical sequence that we often see. For prayer begets a confidence in God that expresses itself in praise and is answered by acts of God, to which praise is the right response. Is that so true? When your heart is overwhelmed, go to the Lord. Pour out your heart before the Lord. But you see, let it be an opportunity to press in and to be in his presence, to be reminded of who God is and what he's able to do. Because as it says, prayer begets a confidence in God that will express itself in praise. Prayer and praise really does change things. The biggest thing it changes is us, our attitudes, our perspectives. It gets our attention off of what's in front of us and onto the greatness of God. That's where we really begin to soar. That's what prayer and praise will do. Listen, we are humans after all. We like to think about ourselves. We like to dwell on self. We like to focus on self. And I'll tell you, there's absolutely no joy in any of that. But prayer and praise gets us on the right object of attention and affection. It gets us fixed on the Lord. Gets our eyes above our problems. Be people of praise and experience the joy and blessing in that. Our problem oftentimes is just low living. We're not rising above these things as we follow the Lord to the rock that's higher than us. Pray that God will indeed do that in your life, to lead you to the rock that is higher than I. That's our heart and our prayer here. A few points to ponder. So worship team comes. First of all, where do you run when your heart is overwhelmed? David teaches us not to suppress our feelings or escape them with distractions, but to cry out to the Lord, knowing he hears and cares. Secondly, are you trying to fix things yourself, or are you being led to the rock? Don't try to climb higher in your own strength. Like David prayed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. We know that surrender is the first step to elevation. Thirdly, do you remember God's past faithfulness in your present fears? David recalled that God had already been a shelter and strong tower. Reflect on your own history with God, because his track record is indeed trustworthy. Lastly, have you decided to dwell in God's presence, even before your situation changes? David resolved to abide in the tabernacle and trust in the shelter of God's wings. He chose to do so. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough comes after we make the decision to simply abide with God and to be in close proximity to him. So let that settle in our hearts here today as we go from here.